It's great. It's my best preacher I've ever heard. She was like, well.
Best ever.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It is so wonderful to be here. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. And I'm going to hand it over in a second to John to introduce our guest, John, also. But just a brief word for those of you that are on my spiritual formation and Sunday school teacher email list. You've heard this already, but John and I, we were sort of brainstorming several months ago about something that we could do during Wednesday nights around election season, something that might be useful. And as I've been thinking about this topic this week, it really has settled in for me deeply how relevant this is for spiritual formation, which is what we do on these Wednesday nights, whether it's Bible study or whatever else, and how important it is for us to be able to have conversations with one another, to learn to love one another, even maybe especially because of our differences. So I'm excited for this. I'm going to turn it over to John so we can get started sooner rather than later, but thank you all for being here.
Eric, do you want to make an announcement about Friday, the changes from Friday since last they heard was Sunday?
So Friday night, I had said on Sunday morning we're going to have a ping pong pizza places event and a member from the Lori staff. There has been a change to that. We are no longer going to have a presenter from Lori, but we are still going to have a program. We are inviting everyone to look a little bit different. Bring an object, a story, a photograph of your hometown or something meaningful to you from your hometown. And then we're going to kind of guide some discussion about sharing that with each other. So, and again, it'll be Americans and internationals together, getting to know one another. So that's mostly what you need to know now, but ask any questions if you have any later. Thanks for the reminder.
All right, thanks, Eric. Any prayer requests we need to cover this evening? I'll say a prayer before we get started. But
As always, Rebecca.
Rebecca.
4 years now.
Continued prayers for you all. All right. Well, I will say a prayer and then introduce our guest. God, we thank you for the chance to be here this evening. Thank you for what we're going to learn, for the discussions that we'll have. We thank you for this congregation that values openness and honesty with each other, even in places sometimes where it's difficult for us to express our opinions or to be afraid that we might not be heard or understood. Pray that this time will be instructive and helpful for us as we reach out to those around us, no matter which way they might lean politically or in other ways. Help us to learn to listen better and to understand and learn to love for them. Pray for Phil and for his family and for all of us as we care for our loved ones. Give us energy and strength for that task. Thank you again for the time we'll have together tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. It is a privilege to introduce our guest this evening, Dr. John Fletcher, who's here. You have a doctorate, a PhD in
Theater history.
Historiography, I believe it said online. So, but is a professor in the theater department at LSU, but also very active locally in creating space for dialogue in lots of different difficult spaces, whether it's about race or politics or cultural differences. John's had training in how to facilitate discussions, and so we thought it would be great to have him here to lead us this evening in talking about that, especially as we get closer to an election year. So John, we're thankful that you're here, and feel free to share any more about yourself as you get started, but we are glad that you're here and look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you. My notes here. All right, so my name's John. I am here to talk to you mainly sort of about Braver Angels, which is, it sounds religious, right? Angels and whatnot, but it's not. It's just a national grassroots organization that It aims to depolarize America, mostly by getting more conservative people, reds, to talk to more liberal people, blues, in mostly a series of like moderated workshops and other sorts of events like that. I'm on their moderator training team now. I am the trained moderator with them, and now I help to train other moderators. I've done lots of workshops nationally, online, at their conventions, such like that. But here's the thing, if you put on the other hat, right, I'm theater professor at Louisiana State University, and I have another hat where I am the lay leader at United Methodist Church. So, and in fact, I am now on the sort of track to become a minister in the United Methodist Church, thanks to changes that just happened in the United Methodist denomination over the summer, allowing me as a gay person to be pursue that path. So what's weird is that usually I kind of have to keep my moderator self, my professor self, and my sort of ministerial self, I have to keep them separate. And so it's kind of a pleasure to be able to mix and match them a little bit tonight. And so you'll excuse me if I sometimes seem more like a sort of Braver Angels spokesman, and then sometimes like a scholar who studies groups like Braver Angels, which I am, and then also a minister who believes that the thing that ties everything together is that, well, you know, it's kind of that command from Lord Jesus. Love your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you. And what does that mean? What can that mean in this sort of election year where both sides are really, if you ask, each side really believes that democracy is somehow at stake, that it's going to be maybe the end of the world if one or the other person wins, rather. So I'll start with my sort of Braver Angels hat on, and we'll do a brief exercise from, is it not working? Well, I'll do it back in. There we are. So, it's going to be an exercise from Braver Angels, where for each of the following questions, I'm going to ask yourself, how often do I, and you'll answer to yourself, you can write these down, no one's going to grade you, it's just for you. So, might as well be honest. How often do I, and it'll be one thing, will it be often, will it be sometimes, or will it be never? And so, you'll get a hang of it pretty soon. How often do I assume that all those people, and by those people we mean, you know, them, on the other side, you know, the people who have the different bumper stickers, the different sort of signs in their yard, the people that they let slip, or maybe they're very overt about how they're voting for the other person, them, not y'all, us, right, them. How often do I assume that all those people think the same way about things? Is that always? Is it sometimes? Is it never? You probably are somewhere on that spectrum. Second question would be, how often do I assign good motives to my side and bad motives to their side? Good or even complex motives to my side. Well, you know, there's a whole range of beliefs on my side, whereas they do it because they're misled or stupid or maybe bad in some way. Often, sometimes never. Other question, how often do I focus on the most extreme views of those on the other side, right? The loudest, the most extreme, the scariest perhaps, the most upsetting, the most offensive, the ones that you just can't wait to tell the people, the other us's about. Like, can you believe what they said now? What about how often do I compare the best on my side with the worst on their side? You know, someone points out something about one of us. Well, they're not really one of us. I mean, you know, we all know to ignore them when they talk about this. Where's them? Them? Or what about, how often, this one I have to say gets me a lot. How often do I get a little rush, satisfaction, hearing criticisms of the other side, like when someone sends me this, wow, this is a great video takedown of the other side, of them, about how they think. And I love watching it. It's like, ooh, that's so good. If only they would see this, they would be in us. They would convert instantly. It'd be magic, but somehow that doesn't seem to happen. And here's a different one. Here's a different sort of thing. So this is a thing, again, from Braver Angels. It may be a little difficult to see. This is, which of the following might be closest to my overall attitude toward the majority of people who support the other side? And I'll read it out loud. So you might say, over here you see maybe some kind of hatred. When I think about the other side, honestly, there's a little bit of hatred, because I just kind of think that they are enemies. They want to harm our country. If it's not hatred, then it's at least some kind of fear. I'm afraid of them. The click up from that would be something more like, well, a kind of disdain. They're ignorant. They're maybe willfully ignorant. They should know better than this. Or they're kind of just in, like some politicians said, they're in a basket of deplorables. Might as well ignore them, or try and find your way around them. The click up on that would be pity. Oh, they've been duped, right? They're well-meaning, but they've been misled. I just feel such pity for them, right? Or maybe it's a click up from that, where it's like, well, I have some basic respect. They have something valuable to contribute. I do not agree with them, but I can see that there's something valuable to having them in the room, having them in the process. And maybe it's just a click even above that, that they have a lot to contribute. That I actually want them in the room. We are incomplete unless those people then are part of a larger us. Where are you on this? And it might depend on what time of day I ask, right? What did you just listen to? And when I think about how close election day is, I don't know. I don't know about you, I tend to click a little bit more towards that extreme side, right? I'm gonna switch hats now. As I mentioned, I'm a theater professor, so I have a PhD. You probably didn't know you can get a PhD in theater, but you can. It's theater history, literature, and theory. My research area, really broadly speaking, I study how social movements use theatrical techniques, things like scripting, staging, spectacle, role play, to move and change hearts and minds for groups they advocate for. So I do research not so much on like plays on stage, what I call capital T theater. I study more little t theater, anything that I can use a little lens of performance to look at. So like a parade, a political rally, a demonstration, a kind of protest. I can look at the ways that what script is going on here. How have they staged themselves? How are they communicating? How are the performers communicating with an audience? In the book I wrote for tenure a while ago, I tried my best to sort of like focus on the performances of the social change performances of groups that I did not personally agree with. So my book was about conservative evangelical outreach techniques. So I did research on, you probably have heard that some of you learned what, are you familiar with the 4 spiritual laws, maybe from Campus Crusade for Christ, or a kind of script that begins, if you were to die right now, are you 100% sure that you would wake up in heaven? Right, and then the script that goes from there. But then I also looked at some, do you know what a hell house is?
Yes.
Right, so for those who don't know, hell houses are haunted house alternatives that some churches put on around Halloween, right? Where the whole church sort of, you deck the whole youth center out and you would take people through, but instead of being a haunted house with like ghosts and goblins, a demon guide will guide you through various vignettes, various scenes of people being tempted by things, right? So, and then sometimes the demon guide will detach them and says, no, go to this party, it's fine, or no, you can watch the Harry Potter DVD, nothing will happen. And you know, it ends badly in every vignette, and then at the end, you are put into hell where you see people, like everyone's like, oh no, if only I had accepted Christ, now I'm in hell forever. And then an angel bursts in, usually it's a little girl, it's kind of like the best Christmas pageant ever. Stop! You don't have to be here, come with me, and you go to heaven, which is frankly a bit more boring, because no one wants to do heaven, but in the production at least, because it's not much fun. And then the pastor comes in and gives you the sort of like, you know, every head bowed, every eye closed, and that sort of thing. That's a hell house. I also went to the Creation Museum in Kentucky, right? Oh, it's amazing. Oh my gosh, y'all. It's amazing. What can I say? They put $27 million into that. They hired a Universal Studios Imagineer to create this grand thing, that a natural history museum that proceeds from the idea that the book of Genesis is literally true. The earth is only 6,000 years old, and so immense, amazing animatronic dinosaurs cavorting with Adam and Eve. You see how all of them, like how could all of them fit on Noah's Ark? Baby dinosaurs is the answer. But I did lots of things like that, and all of these, right? You can hear me sort of maybe seem like I'm making fun, but my goal actually was to represent them truthfully, so that if they read my book or read my articles that I asked some of them to do, they would say, "You got us right." Right? You understand where we're coming from, right? Because I tried to practice Krister Stendhal's 3 rules of religious dialogue. Krister Stendhal used to be, he was a former professor at Harvard Divinity School, president of Harvard Divinity School actually, and he said if you want to understand another religion, there are 3 things you got to do. First, you got to talk to the practitioners, not to the critics. Second, you got to make sure, that you're not comparing your best with their worst. And third, he said, you're to look for moments of holy envy. Holy envy. Try to find something in the other practice that you wish your side had a bit more of. That's what he means by holy envy. And I did my best to sort of, do this with conservative evangelicals. As you might tell, I am not a conservative evangelical myself. I am a hippie-haired theater professor, gay United Methodist, right? I mean, and that's kind of where I am. However, I grew up the son of a Southern Baptist minister. Both my father and my mother actually had seminary degrees from Southern Baptist universities. They were in fact signatories to the founding document of your denomination, the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, because when the Baptist Church moved to the right in the 1980s, they were left behind. And we went through some hard times before they found the Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church, and they discovered their credentials transferred there, and they both retired in the United Methodist Church as ministers. So I think sometimes what would have happened had my parents been a little bit different in their beliefs. I would likely still be a Southern Baptist, one of those sort of really conflicted gay Southern Baptists, and I don't know. I just think whenever I was looking at, whenever I was talking to the people who produce these things, the people who say these sort of scripts, there but for the grace of God go I. There but for the grace of God go I. Moving on. Everything seemed to change for me. I went from this place of like, wow, I can find a lot of respect for my brethren who are conservative evangelicals, and then 2016 happened. And the next 4 years happened, and I have to say for me, I can speak personally as a blue, it became very difficult for me to reconcile how so many of the people I knew and loved and talked to were supporting. I just kind of kept thinking, how could they think that? How could they vote that way? Just as they were thinking the same thing about me. How could you possibly think that way? And I don't know, this is a thing from the Pew research firm that Braver Angels puts out, that we are in this era in which we have long grown used to thinking, how could they possibly think this way? Getting angry at them, getting frustrated at the them, whoever the them are for you, that finally we're just exhausted. That when you ask, like, what do you think about when you think about being, talking politics with someone, 65% of people just say they are exhausted even just thinking about it. It's like, ugh, I just can't even, it's why? Do we have to? Can't we talk about something else? And I think, you know, is it just like, what changed? Is it just the them? Did they change? And I tell you, yes, I think evangelicalism, as many evangelicals will tell you, has changed radically in the last 8 years. And yet, if I'm honest, I've changed too, right? The ways that my general thinking about the them, the other side, has clicked more towards fear, more towards apprehension, more towards how could I possibly talk to them? I find myself judging people not on like the basis of what they do or say, but like, you know, what bumper stickers do you have? What shirt are you wearing? What button are you wearing? What slogans do I, what news channel do you watch? That sort of thing. Are you a supporter of NPR or something like that, right? So that's where sort of I got into Braver Angels. First, as a researcher, frankly, I was searching for what's my next thing, and I ran into this group that formed after 2016 to sort of start talking to the other side. I was like, well, this is a different kind of activism. And I'll get into this here for a second. Just a few things. Braver Angels is, of course, about depolarizing, but let me be nerdy for a sec here and make some sort of distinctions that Braver Angels honors, but doesn't so much get into, but I'll get into in a little bit. When we talk about political polarization, right, we just mean a distance between two policy stances or platforms. Like, people believe very different things. And here's the thing, as much as we decry polarization, we want there to be political polarization, right? In any liberal democracy, there's going to be inevitable disagreements about what do some of our core concepts mean. What does it mean to be a citizen? What are the limits of rights? How do we balance liberties with protections? What does equality mean? All of these are very important questions. There's no pre-given answer. There is instead very fierce disagreement about them. And democracies need that disagreement to survive. A democracy in which we all agree on everything, or when our disagreement means nothing, that's not really a democracy. That's something else. That's like a cult or some brainwashed thing, right? So we need there to be political polarization. When Braver Angels wants to depolarize, what they're talking about and what a lot of political scientists are worried about would be more what's called affective polarization. Affect is in like affect, like a deeply felt emotion. An affect, like when you can tell what someone's feeling by their face, that affect that they wear. Affective polarization registers the degree of negative feelings about those on the other side. See, the situation today isn't the sort of healthy, fierce disagreement between two sides. For one thing, political science tells us we're highly sorted. That is, our policy differences have increasingly become grouped between the two parties, Democrats and Republicans. Both parties have on their own become more homogenous. That it's become much more difficult to find moderate members of either party because we're sorting there. But more worrisome is this sense of affective polarization. The idea, low affective polarization means that, maybe you disagree with me and maybe we can get to like some really fierce arguments, but then, we could go out afterwards and, we have a basic respect for each other. We could have dinner together. Our grandchildren could play together and it would be fine, right? A high affective polarization, though, means that I don't think you're wrong, just wrong. I think you're dangerous. I think you're scary. I think I don't even know how to talk to you anymore. I've tried to mention to students, like, what is this like? It's kind of like, you know, when you meet your first flat earther, someone who honestly believes that the earth is flat, and you have that moment like, really? You're not joking? And you realize how, and then you suddenly have that moment like, I need to suddenly rethink every interaction I have with this person, right? That kind of difference that I can't just sort of paper over because it's a really meaningful difference. However, that degree of affective polarization, Braver Angels intervenes there and says that the high degree there, it leads us to some bad places. It leads us to what they call, and I just have to use a dramatic voice for this because it's pretty dramatic, the four horsemen of polarization. That's their term, not mine. But it would be stereotyping, dismissing, ridiculing, or holding in contempt. Stereotyping, dismissing, ridiculing, and contempt. If I'm honest, I have to think, how often do I think of the other side without some degree of stereotyping, dismissing, ridiculing, or contempt? Here's the thing. These aren't just me hating because I'm a bad, worked up person. If I'm honest with myself, when I indulge in these, I get a bit of pleasure. And that's you know, sociologists can tell you, right? It takes so little to divide humans into teams and for us to invest heavily in those teams. They've done experiments where they've like literally flipped a coin and put you on team purple or team polka dot, and if I did that with you, you would see that it's random. And yet, if we did some activities together, competitive activities together, you would begin to invest some of these about the other side. Well, purples, you know, they always do that. I would start to compare my best with their worst. I'd start to sort of interpret their actions in a bad light. That's just, that's our human way of sort of, that's in the wetware up here. We have to kind of fight against it. So these give me a sense of belonging within us. I know that I'm not them because I hold them in these things. They're self-definitional maneuvers. One more thing. There's some scholars, Liliana Mason and Nathan Calmo, they talk about radical partisanship. That's a step even beyond affective polarization, where it's not just that you're afraid of them and you think they're bad, but you entertain a willingness to endorse or excuse or even enact violence against the other side. I did a series of surveys of Americans over the last 4 years, and just I've seen a rise, and unfortunately this has been on both sides, right? They feel a particular sort of way about one side versus the other. They say, look, I wish we could say otherwise, but both sides seem to have a rise in, I mean, now most people would be like, well, I'm not going to actually hurt someone myself, but you know, would it be so terrible if such and such happened to the other candidate? Right? I mean, so, or there's a little bit of schadenfreude going on when they suffer some, like, well, that was embarrassing for them, wasn't it? Good, right? And then there's a little bit of worry with that, right? So this brings us to Braver Angels, the organization. So what happened is, in the wake of the 2016 election, this guy, a sort of center-right pundit named David Blankenhorn, he began gathering reds and blues together into these workshops, these long workshops. David Blankenhorn is, in fact, this guy right there. And he had, if you go back in time in the aughts, you would see that he had published many an article, many an op-ed in various newspapers against same-sex marriage, right? He was like, look, I have lots of gay friends, I am against same-sex marriage, and yet he became friends with Jonathan Rauch, who was a gay, left-leaning sort of center pundit who would publish just as many op-eds about how gay marriage was a good thing. Over time, David Blankenhorn changed his mind. And he says it was thanks largely to, and he published a big op-ed, like, I've changed my mind on this, and here's why. Because my friend Jonathan Rauch kind of talked me down from an edge, showed me what it was to be this kind of person in the world, to live the world in this sort of way. And he thought, surely this can happen again. And how this happens is face-to-face conversation. So he got this guy, Bill Doherty. Bill Doherty is a psychology professor at the University of Minnesota, but his day job is that he's a marriage counselor. He's been a marriage counselor for decades, and he got this marriage counselor to devise these workshops that get people to talk to one another. And, you know, it sounds like, well, maybe, okay, there are crazier ideas, and it seemed to work. You can find on the Braver Angels website even a whole 1 hour documentary that sort of shows this first workshop. And, you know, there are tense moments of people like telling stories and getting very, very emotional, and then David, you know, the moderators sort of talking them down and making it okay, talking about how to listen. Like, one of the first things they would do was they would talk about you know, stereotypes. The Reds and the Blues would go off to different rooms together, and the Reds were asked, like, what are 5 stereotypes that you think the Blues have about you? And they would list those, and the Blues were doing the same thing. So the 5 stereotypes are often like, well, they think we're anti-intellectual, they think we're racist, they think we're Bible thumpers, and it's like, great, okay, now Reds, what's wrong with each one of these? Tell us why it's wrong. And then, tell me the kernel of truth in each one of these. Why do they think this about you? And the Reds are like, well, yeah, there are some people who are racist that align ourselves with, and Blues, right? They think that we are judgmental, that we are unpatriotic, that we, okay, what's the kernel of truth there? Well, we often are very judgmental, and we tend to frame our judgment in terms of you're not as smart as we are, right? And so that sort of thing, and getting back together and sort of realizing that. From these, they kept doing more and more of these workshops. As a researcher, I went to see lots of these workshops around the country. I eventually became a moderator, and now Braver Angels has thrived. There are several moments where I thought after January 6th, well, that's it for Braver Angels, but no, they're stronger than ever. They had their national convention this last summer, and it was a fascinating experience that I'm happy to talk more about. So right now, Braver Angels has a lot of different things, but they have experiential workshops like the Red-Blue workshop I described, where these are in-depth 5 to 6 hours encounters between 7 Reds and 7 Blues, so a small group of Reds and Blues. And they go through various exercises where they develop some trust, they talk about stereotypes, there's listening, and they end with how to ask questions of understanding of each other, not attack questions, but, you know, really, why do you think that? What do you mean when by this? Like, someone actually asked, like, what do you mean by privilege, right? What does that mean? And the Red-Blue workshops are an example of common ground workshops. Another kind of workshop, shorter, would be skills workshops, like briefer, like 1.5 to 3 hour work encounters between larger groups, where we teach sort of more practical skills like introspection, listening, how to have conversations, how to have boundaries with people, right? Because one of the things that Braver Angels insists on is like a no mandates policy, right? You don't have to do this, right? No one in Braver Angels is going to say, you have to go out and talk to the most extreme person you know and be loving towards them right away. No. You kind of got to work up, right? Be safe. And also be aware of, like, you know, you don't have a conversation that you know is just going to be traumatic for both of you. However, there are ways to make conversations less traumatic, right? And with some people, you may be able to do that. A quick example of one of the skills that we teach in the skills workshops, and I'm going to go quickly through this. If you want more about this, you can take one of these workshops. We offer them all the time online. You can just zoom in and go through them. It's nice. They talk about the LAP skills, L-A-P-P. And the first is just, you know, listen to what the other person is saying. And as normal, right, they point out that most of the time when we listen, most of the time when I'm listening to a them, I'm thinking like, what's the mistake in your argument? Where can I counterattack? And instead, you kind of have to suspend that. You should look for some underlying values. You should suspend the need to debate them. You should give up the idea that you are going to conquer or convert them with your arguments. All you're doing is trying to understand. In fact, one of the favorite things to do is to ask for an origin story. Not why do you believe this, but how did you get here? How did you get to supporting this candidate? And they tell you a story rather than making an argument. And you get to hear their values rather than their facts or their statistics. After that would be acknowledge, right? It's basic stuff. Show you heard, right? You reflect back what you heard. Like, so what you're saying is, and you're listening for them to say that, yes, that's it exactly, right? And if you can, you should agree. And it could be just like, I agree, things are really scary right now. Yeah. You can ask for clarification if necessary, but all you're doing is reflecting back. You're not even offering anything of your own. You're not trying to undercut their argument at all. You're just listening. The next would be pivoting, and this is a weird one because we don't usually do it in conversations, but Bravery Angels teaches that it's important to give a statement that signals that you'd like to switch from just listening into offering your own perspective. I've been thinking a lot about this. Would it be okay if I told you some of the stuff I've been reading? Or like, you know, I have some thoughts about this myself. Could I share those now? And then you wait. You get their consent to go on. If they're not willing to listen to you, then, you know, just go back to listening and acknowledging. Maybe exit the conversation. But if they say, yeah, what do you have to say? Then you can go on. It's a weird maneuver. Again, we don't usually think of it. Bravery Angels often asks you to slow down in a conversational gesture. Give it some space. Right? And then after that, you deliver your perspective. You offer your view, but again, some of these seem a little cliched, right? You use I statements, right? Rather than like, well, climate change is the worst hoax in the world, or climate change is the threat that we all are going to have to face. You say something like, I'm really worried about the way that things are getting warmer in the Gulf, warmer all around the world, right? Just using I statements. You avoid debating. And again, we're very clear, no mandates. You don't have to do this. You shouldn't do this with everyone. And we also teach some, exit strategies. If it is not going well, you get to end the conversation, right? You're adults. Oh, sorry. Maybe we should. I don't want to get excited about this or debate. Maybe we should talk about something else. It's not right? In the closing arc of this, I'll say there's lots of workshops and lots of different lessons. I'm going to draw out some lessons that I think that we as people of faith, particularly if you're a Christian, can draw from Bravery Angels, which is not formally Christian, but some things that I sort of like. The lesson of Bravery Angels that they teach is first, focus on the person, not the position. Find out who this person is, rather than the politician they support, who they're voting for, the party they support, the policy they support. See the person. Ask for that origin story. I want to emphasize, this does not mean that we're going to just agree to disagree. It does not mean that we're going to meet in some magical middle space. Bravery Angels says there may not be a magical middle space, right? You are not asked to give up where you stand, right? You are, however, asked to sort of see the person and respect them, look at them face to face, not just posts online. The second would be to meet people where they are, not where you wish they were. This is the hard one for me, this idea that, and this, as a scholar, it's fascinating to me because it's very different from the other sort of groups on the right or the left that I study. The idea that You go into this encounter giving up the idea that you are going to conquer or convert this other person, that you are entirely after something else, right? Y'all, I still have enough Baptist in me that just kind of like, what? Or maybe it's a teacher in me. It's like, if only I could explain them why they're wrong. I could give them the right facts, and then they would agree with me. And one of the things that Bill Doherty, a marriage counselor, says, like, you're never going to agree on facts, right? You are not going to out-statistic the other person in a single encounter, right? So if you're going to engage with them, do something else. And you kind of, there's a little bit of grieving that has to happen. Yes, this person actually believes this thing that I find shocking. What now, right? I will say that as Christians, we are Christian, we believe that this is what God does for us. Meets us where we are, right? And is patient with us, even as God is persistent with us. The third thing would be to shift your heart into curiosity mode, get out of conquer and convert, and shift into curiosity. And that the goal, Brave Angel says, like the goal is accurate disagreement. Accurate disagreement. What do they actually believe? And where are our actual differences? Because it's a proven fact again and again, it's pretty robustly replicated, that we tend to overstate what the other people believe. We tend to believe that the other side is much more extreme than they actually are, right? Both sides tend to assign much more extreme views, right? Another thing that Braver Angel says is that, here's the thing, I run to a lot of people saying, I think it's just better to avoid talking about politics, and Braver Angel says it's not. I cannot be really authentic with someone unless I'm actually authentic with them, right? If I keep a part of myself hidden away forever from someone, there's going to be limits to how close we are. On a larger level, democracies don't work if one side or the other decides to just be kind of sullen and silent to avoid all conflict. We cannot be so phobic of conflict that we avoid being honest about what we agree and disagree with. We can do conflict better, right? That's hard, I think, for us as Protestants, particularly in the South, where, the unwritten commandment, be thou passive-aggressive toward one another. I will show this person how much I disapprove of them by being silent and just and different situations are different situations, but sometimes we need to do more than just that. And the final sort of lesson I would say that's important from Braver Angels is to look to the far horizon. Look to the far horizon. That video about the first red-blue encounter, it ends with Peter Yarrow from Peter, Paul, and Mary, who's a member of Braver Angels, singing "This Land Is Your Land," and everyone singing together. It's a little bit of a kumbaya moment, which, he's Peter Yarrow, he can get away with that. But at the same time, I'll say, I kind of wish that this video didn't end that way, because my experience moderating, participating in these sort of things is not like everyone is kumbaya all together. It is hard. It is difficult. It is like you go away sometimes with a little bit of grief. I recognize how far apart we are on this issue, and yet there's that grieving without being afraid of or hating that other person, right? The difference remains, the affect has changed. Because here's the thing, that idea of what I like better about Braver Angels is not so much their invocation of some happy civility that we can all get to, a magical middle ground where we all just love each other and can embrace each other. That doesn't so much exist. I like Braver Angels as an argument that, okay, apart from the feel-good stuff, here's the thing. No matter who wins in November, there's going to be 40% of the country that voted for the other person and is just really, really PO'd about it, right? They're going to be hurt, they're going to be very angry, and usually they're going to do their best through Congress or whatever to mess up the other person until the next election so that they can win and we can do the opposite to them. And Braver Angels basically said, this is not working. This doesn't work. We have to get past, so I being a theater professor, I teach lots of like classical dramas and stuff like that. And one of my favorite classical dramas to quote is Avengers Endgame, that movie, that superhero movie where if you've not seen it, essentially what happens is that the good guys, they get a hold of the magic glove that when you snap, all of your enemies turn into dust and blow away and you've won. And victory means all of my enemies are dust and are gone. There's no such thing as that magic glove. And even if there were, would you snap? I think as Christians, we are forbidden from doing that. Which is lucky anyway. There's no magic glove, right? Nothing is going to like magically make the 40% of people, the them, disappear. It's just not going to happen. There's always an and then one. That's what I mean by look to the far horizon. Really quick, just to say, like, most of the time I'll say I'm kind of two cheers for Braver Angels. Because, and when I'm in moderator mode, great, yay, Braver Angels. And then when I'm in scholar mode, sometimes ministerial mode, I'm like, but be careful of these things. For instance, we got to be aware that calls for civility and depolarization, sometimes those can be used as a sort of cudgel against particularly minorities, right? Like, I know you're upset about racism or sexism, but could you just be nicer about it? Maybe if you were, maybe just like, they're really set in their ways. So just be forgiving. That we have to be careful sometimes to not always do we want this. We also, I think, have to worry about bad actors, chaos agents, conflict entrepreneurs who can pretend to want a sort of civil, wonderful dialogue, but they're really doing so cynically. That sometimes I think Braver Angels is not well set up for bad actors who would infiltrate them. Like, if someone lies about what they believe or plays too much devil's advocate, right? That can be a bit disruptive, and I think that's a problem that we have to sort of like deal with in other ways. I would also say that we have to be careful about seeing depolarization as the end rather than a means to an end. Braver Angels used to be called Better Angels. That was its original name until someone else who had that name before them sued them and said, all right, we'll change. But they got the name Better Angels from Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address. The closing lines are, this is Abraham Lincoln speaking on the eve of the Civil War, right? And he's just been elected, he is being inaugurated, that sort of thing. And he says, I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection, the mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone, all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Boy, that guy could write, right? Those are beautiful words. The rest of the speech is not so beautiful, because there Lincoln promises at length to the slaveholding states, which had already seceded, that he will not touch the laws regarding slavery, that he will faithfully enforce fugitive laws, allowing the states to recapture people who escape. And it troubles me to think of an antebellum version of Braver Angels that would have meetings between, those who are pro-slavery and those who are anti-slavery, so that they could get to a sense of accurate disagreement. That troubles me. I have trouble considering how we could have any kind of, it changes the way that you have a civilized debate if what you're debating is your own humanity. Right? If you are expected to defend your right to engage in a democratic conversation at all, I'm not sure that Braver Angels is necessarily the right choice there. I'm not sure what is, and I'm just going to offer this to you. This is a troubling thing for me, because a lot of our core disagreements are precisely about that, right? So I'm not exactly sure what to do there. And I'll also note that we Christians, we people of faith, we're not so great about dealing with conflict. Our preferred mode of conflict is war and schism. Right? All of us, I'm a United Methodist. We just went through a schism, right? And that schism benefited me personally. I can pursue ordination even though I'm gay now. And yet I do think about those people who are still there, just down the street, with whom I've broken bread, I've shared the Lord's Supper with them. What do I think of them now? What do they think of me? And then, more worrisome, my father, in his sermons, he was fond of, John 13, 34 through 35, by this shall all people know that you are my disciples, that you show love towards one another. And my father said this is the most dangerous verse in the Bible, because in that verse, Jesus gives to the world the ability to judge whether we are Christian or not. Not based on our intentions, not based on what we say, but does the world see us Christians showing love to other Christians? I don't think that we often pass that test. And I don't know. I have to sort of wrestle with that. I must remind myself that schism doesn't mean that the people that I've split from disappear. The neighbor is often my stranger. And then the final big worry that I have, I'll say, is that all this depolarization stuff just may not win elections, right? If I really honestly believe that democracy is on the ballot, and there are moments when I actually do, I have to wonder, am I just aiding the oncoming of fascism? I read today that both sides are pretty sure that democracy is in danger, that some kind of fascism is coming. They mean different things by fascism, but they're both sure that it's coming. And if it is, then I'm going to look back and wow, was I just wringing my hands about how bad polarization is when fascism is coming? And I don't know. And then I have to remind myself that our Lord Jesus does not promise us that the United States is going to survive forever. There were Christians before there was ever a United States of America. There were Christians before there was ever a United Methodist Church. There were Christians before there were ever Baptists. There were Christians before there were ever Catholics. I trust that there will be Christ followers even after our nation, our churches, our denominations are gone. There's a sense in which, as a Christ follower, I am to look to the far horizon. And yet that's the difficult thing, right? The kingdom of God, Jesus says, is at hand. We are to begin creating it in the here and now, regardless of what wars and rumors of wars happen. There has to be a sort of gear. I can't just hermit myself and not worry about this. I'm participating in the world, and yet I also have to occasionally take the perspective of the far horizon. The idea of what does it mean to show love to my enemies? What does it mean to act as Christ would towards the people who I hope do not win? That word hope. Václav Havel, the first president of the Czech Republic, who ushered his country, Czechoslovakia, out of the Soviet regime, also a playwright, by the way. He makes a distinction, and this is a distinction that David Langner said, between optimism and hope. He said optimism is believing that what you do will work out, whereas hope is believing that what you do needs to be done, regardless of whether it works out. All of these things that Braver Angels talks about, the see people for meet them where they are, invest curiosity in them, be authentic, look to the far horizon. All of the things they teach, listen, acknowledge, pivot, perspective, those are such small things, No one of these things is going to change everything. I often say that, you know, those little skills, they're civility calisthenics, right? That civility, love for your neighbor, that's not a song that plays itself. We have to develop the muscles necessary to reach beyond our fear. Brady Whitten from First Methodist, he says, look, right now we are all in armadillo mode, right? We are so frightened and afraid that the sort of reptile part of our head has us all armadilloed up, and yet asking questions, seeing people, being authentic, these are things that can get us out of that armadillo mode and help us to recognize ways that we can make the kingdom of God truly at hand.
Thank you, John. That gives me hope. I'm sure that you'll have some questions and things that you want to ask. We are finished with our time in here, so if you can stick around for a couple of minutes, and allow folks to ask questions. Next week, same time, we'll be meeting together, but putting some of these things into practice in terms of conversations and things. So be thinking already about what's different about the people around you, so you know something to argue about. Just kidding, of course. Thank you again for coming, and thank you all for being here this evening. And again, feel free to ask questions and keep the conversation moving along. All right. Y'all have a great evening.